1:47 a.m. camera offline, 2:28 a.m. pacemaker disconnect. 41 minutes between those two events. That's not chaos, that's a timeline, that's structure. Now ask yourself, who would know how to disable a camera? Who would understand the medical implications of a pacemaker disconnect? Who would have the composure to operate in that house, in that time frame, under that pressure? Not just anyone. Someone familiar. Back to March 2nd. Tommaso Cioni walking past the cameras at Nancy's home. The public watching his gait, comparing it to the masked figure from February 1st. People want the answer to be simple. They want the comparison to reveal guilt. They want the posture, the stride, even the shoulder movement to align perfectly and confirm what they already suspect. But that's not how investigations work. What matters isn't whether the walk matches. What matters is whether the framework allows for multiple actors. Because if you're looking for one person, you're scanning for a single silhouette. But if you're looking for two, suddenly the surveillance footage isn't about confirming identity. It's about confirming roles. One person at the porch on February 1st, another person driving Nancy home on January 31st. What if they're both pieces of the same structure? What if the person at the porch wasn't there to abduct Nancy, but to prepare for someone else who would? Let me leave you with this. Nancy Guthrie was inside her home at 9:50 p.m. on January 31st. By 2:28 a.m. on February 1st, her pacemaker had disconnected. Somewhere in those 4.5 hours, a 72-year-old woman was removed from her own house. A house she knew. A house with cameras. A house in a neighborhood where people notice. And yet no one saw, no one heard, no one intervened. Which means whoever did this wasn't just capable. They were familiar. They knew the house. They knew the cameras. They knew the neighborhood. They knew Nancy. And if that's true, if familiarity is the key, then you're not looking for a stranger. You're looking for someone close. Close enough to visit. Close enough to plan. Close enough to know exactly when to strike. The question isn't just who. The question is how many, because once you see the structure, the roles, the timing, the coordination, you can't unsee it. And once you start looking for two people instead of one, everything changes. Let's go backward. Before Nancy Guthrie disappeared, before the pacemaker disconnect, before the cameras went offline, there was surveillance, not by law enforcement, not by neighbors, by whoever was planning this, and we know that because the surveillance was captured. Pima County Sheriff's Office flags unusual activity in the Catalina foothills area. A figure moving through residential streets captured on ring cameras, but not behaving the way a normal pedestrian behaves. No direct approach to homes, no interaction with properties, just presence. At the time, it's logged, noted, filed under suspicious activity, the kind of report that might get circulated internally but doesn't make headlines, not yet. But looking back after Nancy's disappearance, that January 11th flag becomes something else. It becomes the beginning of a pattern. Here's where it gets strange. Approximately 6.5 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home, a ring camera captures something unusual, a figure walking backward past a residence, not stumbling, not confused, not looking over their shoulder casually, walking backward, deliberately, as if the direction itself is the point. Now, why would someone do that? Let me explain how ring cameras work. These devices rely on motion-triggered activation. When movement enters the detection zone, the camera wakes up, begins recording, and captures whatever triggered it. But there's a delay. Usually 1 to 2 seconds between motion detection and full recording. That delay is critical. And if you're walking forward past a Ring camera, your face enters the frame during the activation window. The camera captures your approach, your features, your identifying characteristics. But if you're walking backward, your face never enters the active recording frame. By the time the camera is fully recording, you're already past the optimal angle. The camera captures your back, your silhouette, your movement, but not your face. This isn't an accident. This is discipline. This is someone who understands how the technology works and how to move inside its blind spots. The same January 23rd footage captures something else. As the figure walks backward, a dog begins barking from inside a nearby residence. Loud, persistent. The kind of bark that startles people, that makes them turn around instinctively. But this person doesn't turn. They maintain backward movement. They don't react. They don't flinch. They don't adjust. They just keep walking. Think about what that reveals. When something unexpected happens, a dog barking, a car horn, a door slamming, the human instinct is to turn toward the sound, to assess the threat, to reorient. But not here. Here, the priority isn't comfort, it isn't curiosity, it's discipline. The person walking backward past this residence is so committed to avoiding facial capture that they override their own instincts. That tells you something about preparation, about training, about someone who has thought through every variable and decided that exposure is the highest risk. Now we arrive at Nancy's porch. Same area, same technology, but the behavior has shifted. A figure approaches Nancy's front door, no longer walking backward, moving normally now, wearing an Ozark Trail backpack with reflective strips. The kind of backpack you can buy at Walmart, common, unremarkable, designed not to stand out. The figure reaches Nancy's doorbell camera and taps it, twice, not violently, not aggressively, just 2 deliberate taps. Tap, tap, then leaves. No forced entry, no interaction with the door, just the taps and the departure. At first glance, this might seem random, a prank, a test. But placed in context, after the backward walk, after the surveillance, after the January 11th flags, it becomes something else. It becomes a confirmation. The taps aren't random, they're communicating something. Either to the camera itself, testing whether it's active, whether it's recording, or to someone watching later. And then 46 minutes later, the camera goes offline. Let's map the progression. January 11th, initial surveillance flagged. Figure observed in Catalina foothills. January 23rd. Backward walk captured 6.5 miles from Nancy's home. Facial avoidance confirmed. Discipline under pressure. February 1st, 1:47 a.m. Figure at Nancy's porch. Direct engagement with camera, 2 taps. Departure. February 1st, 2:33 a.m. Camera goes offline. February 1st, 2:28 a.m. Nancy's pacemaker disconnects. Do you see the pattern? This isn't random escalation. This is intelligence gathering followed by execution. The backward walk wasn't about Nancy's house. It was about understanding how Ring cameras work, how to move past them, how to avoid identification. And the February 1st taps weren't about breaking in. They were about confirming the camera's status, about testing response time, about ensuring the system was active, so it could be disabled later. And then, less than an hour after those taps, Nancy's camera goes offline and her pacemaker disconnects. That's not coincidence. That's coordination. According to multiple investigative reports, Nancy's property may have been visited several times prior to the abduction. Not just February 1st, multiple visits, multiple approaches, each one gathering a specific piece of intelligence. Camera angles, entry points, lighting conditions, neighbor sight lines, timing of street traffic. Think about what that means operationally. If one person is making multiple visits to the same property, they're increasing their exposure exponentially. Every visit is a risk, every camera, every neighbor, every passing car. But if two people are involved, one person gathers intelligence, walks the perimeter, tests the cameras, maps the blind spots. The other person stays back, receives the intelligence, plans the execution. When it's time to act, the executor enters with perfect information. They know where to go, how to move, what to disable, where Nancy will be. The intelligence gatherer never enters, never touches the scene, never leaves forensic evidence inside the house. The roles are divided, the risk is distributed, and that's how you pull off a 41-minute abduction in a monitored neighborhood without a single external witness. Let's return to the Ozark Trail backpack. Reflective strips, common design, available at Walmart, Target, and sporting goods stores across Tucson. Why does that matter? Because it's generic. If you're planning a crime, you don't wear something distinctive. You don't wear custom gear. You don't wear anything that makes you memorable. You wear what everyone else wears. The backpack isn't a clue, it's camouflage, but here's what's interesting. The figure in the backward walk footage on January 23rd wasn't reported as wearing a backpack. The figure flagged on January 11th, unclear. But February 1st, backpack confirmed. That suggests the backpack served a purpose on that specific night. It wasn't part of the earlier surveillance. It was part of the execution phase. What's in the backpack? Tools, gloves, a change of clothes, equipment to disable the camera, maybe restraints, maybe a weapon or maybe nothing. Maybe the backpack is empty, and maybe it's just part of the costume, part of the story. Someone out for a late-night walk, someone who looks like they belong. But the fact that it appears on February 1st and not earlier suggests it was chosen for a reason. Here's what we know for certain. Whoever conducted this surveillance understood how Ring cameras function. They understood motion-triggered activation. They understood the recording delay. They understood blind spots and optimal angles. And they used that knowledge to avoid identification. That's not common knowledge. That's not something you figure out by accident. That's research. That's someone who either has a technical background, IT, security systems, law enforcement, or someone who spent time studying these systems specifically. And that narrows the suspect pool considerably. Because most criminals don't think about activation delays. They don't practice backward walks. They don't test cameras with deliberate taps. But someone planning a high-stakes abduction, someone who knows they'll be on camera multiple times, they think about it, they prepare, they test. January 23rd backward walk. Facial avoidance, pure surveillance. February 1st, 1:47 a.m. forward approach, camera engagement, taps. This is the shift from testing to execution. The backward walk proves the method works. Proves you can move past cameras without identification. But on February 1st, the behavior changes. No more avoidance, no more backward movement. Why? Because by February 1st, the cameras are about to be disabled anyway. The taps aren't about avoiding the camera, they're about marking it, confirming its position, and ensuring the execution team knows exactly where it is when it's time to take it offline. 46 minutes later, the camera goes offline. 41 minutes after that, Nancy's pacemaker disconnects. Everything is timed, everything is planned. And that's when you realize The surveillance wasn't just about Nancy's house. It was about building a system where every variable is controlled, every risk is calculated, every movement is rehearsed. The pattern in the dark isn't random, it's architecture. If one person is conducting all this surveillance, multiple visits, backward walks, camera tests, they're exposed. Every ring camera, every neighbor, every passing vehicle. Each one a potential witness, each one a potential source of identification. But if two people are involved, one person gathers intelligence. He maps the terrain, tests the systems, learns the patterns. The other person receives the briefing, studies the layout, prepares the execution. When the time comes, the executor enters with near-perfect information. They don't need to test the cameras, Ominum. Someone already did. They don't need to map the exits. Someone already mapped them. They don't need to guess Nancy's location. Someone already knows the house. The intelligence gatherer stays clean. The executor takes the risk. And if something goes wrong, only one person is exposed. Only one person leaves forensic evidence. Only one person can be tied to the scene. The other remains invisible. By February 1st, the surveillance is complete. The patterns are mapped. The cameras are tested. The entry points are confirmed. Everything is ready. And then, at 1:47 a.m., someone approaches Nancy's porch, taps the camera twice, and walks away. Not because they're leaving, because the real work is about to begin. The pattern in the dark isn't just about who was watching Nancy's house. It's about who was learning it, learning the systems, learning the timing, learning every detail necessary to make a 72-year-old woman disappear from her own home without a trace. And once you understand the pattern, once you see the intelligence loop, the multi-visit structure, the role division, you realize this wasn't opportunistic, this was architectural. And somewhere in Tucson, the architect is still out there. The question is who built the system and who executed it. We've established the structure, the surveillance, the testing, the execution. We've mapped the timeline, 41 minutes, 2 events, 1 exit. We've identified the operational framework. Intelligence gathering separated from execution, risk distributed across roles. But now the theory has to become personal. Because patterns don't abduct people, people do. And when you start mapping real individuals into the 2-role framework, the architect and the operative, 2 names emerge with unsettling clarity. Tommaso Cioni, Dominic Evans. Let's examine why. Start with proximity. Tommaso Cioni isn't a stranger to Nancy Guthrie. He's not a distant associate. He's not someone who occasionally crossed paths with her at community events. He's her son-in-law. Married to Nancy's daughter, Annie Guthrie, for approximately 2 decades. Regular access to Nancy's home over those 20 years. Invited for dinners, family gatherings, holidays. He knows the house. And not the way a guest knows a house, the layout, the bathroom, the kitchen. The way someone familiar knows a house. He knows where Nancy sleeps. He knows the hallway configuration. He knows which doors creak, which floorboards settle, where the cameras are positioned. He knows the blind spots. And on January 31st, on the night Nancy disappeared, Tommaso Cioni was the last confirmed person to see her alive. Let's reconstruct that night. Tommaso drives Nancy home from dinner at his residence in Tucson. They arrive at her home in the Catalina foothills. He walks her to the door. She enters. He leaves. This is confirmed. Documented, undisputed. What happens next is where the timeline fractures. Between 9:50 p.m. and 1:47 a.m., roughly 4 hours, Nancy is inside her home, alone. Then at 1:47 a.m., the doorbell camera goes offline. 41 minutes later, at 2:28 a.m., her pacemaker disconnects. Now ask yourself, who would know Nancy's routine after dinner? Who would know when she typically goes to bed? When the house is quietest? When neighbors are least likely to be awake? Someone who's been there before. Someone who's watched that routine unfold dozens, maybe hundreds of times over 20 years. Someone like Tommaso Cioni. Tommaso isn't just Nancy's son-in-law. He's an AP biology teacher. That means he has a working knowledge of human physiology, cardiovascular systems, medical devices like pacemakers, how they function, what interrupts them, what a disconnect event might signify. He also has a working knowledge of forensic science, DNA transfer, contamination, how gloves prevent fingerprints, how fiber evidence is collected. It's what investigators look for at crime scenes. This isn't specialized knowledge. AP biology covers these topics. But it's more than most people have. And in the context of a planned abduction, one that leaves no forced entry, no external witnesses, no clear forensic evidence, that kind of knowledge becomes relevant. Let's talk about the glove. Approximately 2 miles from Nancy's home, investigators recovered a glove. A single glove, not a pair, just one. Forensic analysis revealed DNA on the glove. Male DNA, unknown. No match in the FBI database. That's significant. No match means the DNA doesn't belong to anyone with a criminal record, anyone who's been arrested, anyone who's been entered into CODIS. It also means the person who left that DNA is either someone with no prior criminal history or someone who's never been caught. And now think about the glove itself. Why one glove? Why not both? The glove is 2 miles from Nancy's home, not at the scene, not in the driveway, not along the immediate escape route. 2 miles. That's not where you drop something by accident. That's where you dispose of something deliberately. You drive away from the scene, you exit the immediate area, and then, when you're far enough away that the disposal site won't be tied to the primary scene, you ditch the evidence. But if you're planning this carefully, if you're the architect, you don't leave DNA on a glove, unless you're not the one wearing it. Here's the framework. The architect knows the house, knows Nancy, knows the routine, provides the intelligence. The operative executes, enters, removes, escapes. If Tommaso Cioni is the architect, his DNA wouldn't be at the scene. He doesn't need to be. He provides the layout, the timing, the camera positions, the exit strategy. Someone else wears the gloves, someone else does the physical work. And if that someone else drops a glove 2 miles from the scene, DNA intact, the forensic trail leads to a person with no record, no history, no obvious connection. It leads to the operative, not the architect. Let's talk about what it takes to architect something like this. Patience, planning, discipline. You don't rush a timeline this tight. You don't improvise a 41-minute abduction in a monitored neighborhood. You study the environment. You test the systems. You rehearse the movements. You anticipate variables. What if Nancy doesn't go to bed at the expected time? What if a neighbor is awake? Or what if the camera doesn't go offline as planned? You build contingencies. And you do all of this while maintaining a public persona. You go to work, you interact with family, you attend events, you behave normally, because the moment someone suspects you're involved, the structure collapses. That requires compartmentalization, the ability to separate the planning from the performance, to keep two realities running in parallel without letting them bleed into each other. Tommaso Cioni is a teacher. He manages classrooms, he delivers lessons, he interacts with students, parents, administrators. He functions in a structured environment every day. And if he can maintain that structure publicly while privately planning an abduction, he's exactly the kind of person who could architect this. Now let's talk about the second man. Dominic Evans isn't a stranger to Tommaso Cioni. They've known each other for 19 years. Bandmates, both played in a group called Early Black, 19 years of rehearsals, performances, late-night drives to gigs. The kind of relationship where communication becomes non-verbal, where you learn to read someone's timing, their rhythm, their cues. That's not a casual friendship, that's a bond. And bonds like that, built over decades, create trust. The kind of trust where you can ask someone to do something difficult, something risky, something most people would refuse. Dominic Evans has a history in Pima County. Burglary, robbery, theft. That's not speculation, that's record. Which means Dominic Evans has experience with forced entry, confrontation, removing property or people from a scene, operating under pressure, evading law enforcement. He's done this before. Not an abduction specifically, but crimes involving entry, control, and exit. He understands the mechanics, and unlike Tommaso Cioni, who has no criminal record, Dominic Evans has been inside the system. He knows what investigators look for, what mistakes get you caught, what details matter. That experience doesn't just make him capable, it makes him efficient. The FBI released a description of the individual captured on Nancy's porch on February 1st. Height, approximately 5 feet 9 inches to 5 feet 10 inches. Build, average. Facial hair, present. Dominic Evans fits that range, not perfectly, not exclusively, but within the parameters. And when you combine the physical alignment with the behavioral alignment, someone capable of forced entry, someone with a criminal history, and someone who knows Tommaso Cioni intimately, the profile starts to solidify. This isn't about certainty, this is about probability. Who among Tommaso's associates has the capability to execute a high-risk abduction? Who has experience operating outside the law? Who has the physical profile that matches the surveillance footage? Dominic Evans checks every box. Let's talk about what 19 years of collaboration creates. When you're in a band with someone for that long, you develop synchronization. You learn their timing, their instincts, their tendencies. You learn to communicate without speaking, a glance, a nod, a shift in posture. That kind of nonverbal coordination is exactly what you'd need for a two-person operation like this. One person disabling the cameras, the other entering. One person controlling Nancy, and the other preparing the vehicle. One person executing the exit, the other covering the escape route. You don't need to discuss every move in real time. You already know how the other person operates. That's not something you develop in a few months. That's something you build over decades. And Tommaso Cioni and Dominic Evans had 19 years to build it. Here's why the two-person framework makes sense. If Tommaso Cioni is involved, he can't be the one entering Nancy's house. Too much exposure, too much risk. He's family. He's been there dozens of times. His DNA is everywhere. His fingerprints are everywhere. If he's caught inside the house during an abduction, there's no explanation, no alibi, no defense. But if he's at home, asleep, documented, uninvolved, and someone else enters, now the forensic trail splits. The operative leaves evidence. Gloves, DNA, footprints, fibers. But the architect stays clean. He's not at the scene. He's not on camera. He's not physically involved. He just provided the information. And providing information isn't a crime. Not unless someone can prove intent, coordination, conspiracy, which requires the operative to talk. Dominic Evans is based in the Tucson area, not Catalina foothills, Tucson proper. But he has access to routes heading south, toward Marana, toward Rio Rico, toward the border. If you're planning an escape after an abduction, you don't head toward population centers. You head toward empty corridors, toward areas with fewer cameras, fewer checkpoints, fewer witnesses. You head toward places where a vehicle can move without attracting attention. And if Dominic Evans has experience in Pima County, criminal history, familiarity with the terrain, he knows those routes. He knows where law enforcement focuses their patrols, where cameras are positioned, where you can move without being tracked. That's not theoretical, that's operational knowledge. Here's where the theory gets uncomfortable. What if the roles aren't as clean as we've suggested? What if the architect and the operative aren't entirely separate? What if Tommaso Cioni didn't just plan the abduction? What if he participated in the early stages, walking Nancy to the door on January 31st, ensuring she's inside, confirming the house is secure, then leaving? And later that night, or early the next morning, someone else enters, someone Tommaso coordinated with, someone he trusts, someone like Dominic Evans. Now the roles overlap. Tommaso provides the intelligence, ensures Nancy is home, confirms the timeline. Dominic executes the entry, controls the scene, removes Nancy. Both are involved. Both are essential. But only one is physically at the crime scene during the abduction, which means only one leaves forensic evidence. We haven't talked about why. Why would Tommaso Cioni want Nancy Guthrie gone? Why would Dominic Evans agree to help? The investigation hasn't revealed a clear financial motive. No large inheritance, no insurance payout, no obvious gain from Nancy's disappearance. But absence of a visible motive doesn't mean absence of motive. Family dynamics, hidden debts, personal grievances, control over assets, motives can be buried, hidden in private conversations, concealed in financial records that haven't been scrutinized yet. Or maybe the motive isn't financial, maybe it's relational. Maybe Nancy knew something. Maybe she was in the way of something. Maybe her presence was a complication, and complications can be removed. March 2nd, Tommaso Cioni walking past the cameras at Nancy's home. Flowers, candles, public grief. But people aren't watching grief. They're watching his walk, comparing it to the masked figure from February 1st. And here's the thing. The comparison doesn't have to prove guilt. It just has to prove possibility. Because once the public sees the possibility, once they map Tommaso's movements onto the surveillance footage, they stop seeing him as a grieving son-in-law. They start seeing him as a suspect, and that changes everything. Tommaso Cioni, Dominic Evans, two men, 2 decades of connection, 2 roles that fit the operational framework. One with access, one with experience, one with knowledge, one with capability. But here's what matters. The theory doesn't require certainty, it just requires structure. And the structure is there, the surveillance, the coordination, the execution. Someone planned this, someone executed it. And when you map real people onto the framework, when you look for who had access, who had capability, who had connection, these 2 names rise to the surface, not because the evidence is overwhelming, because the alignment is. An alignment in an investigation like this is where you start. Not where you end, but where you start. 2:28 a.m. Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker disconnects. Inside her home, something has happened, and something final enough to register as a disconnect event. Something severe enough that her heart, or the device monitoring it, can no longer transmit signals. But the operation isn't over, because now whoever is inside that house has to leave, and leaving is where most criminals fail. 8 minutes after the pacemaker disconnect, a vehicle is captured on camera. Location: Camino Royale, a quiet residential road approximately 2.5 miles from Nancy's home. The vehicle appears to be a Kia Soul, compact, common. The kind of car you see in dozens of driveways across Tucson, but the timing is critical. 2:28 a.m., pacemaker disconnect. 2:36 a.m., vehicle on Camino Royale. 8 minutes. The travel time from Nancy's home to Camino Royale is approximately 6 to 7 minutes under normal driving conditions. No traffic, no delays, a direct route. Which means if the vehicle on Camino Royale is connected to the abduction, the timeline is tight. Pacemaker disconnects. Someone exits the house. Vehicle is already positioned nearby or retrieved quickly. 8 minutes later, the vehicle is captured on camera 2.5 miles away. That's not chaos, that's precision. Let's map the escape corridor. From Nancy's home in the Catalina foothills, there are multiple possible routes out of the immediate area. South toward Rio Rico and Mexico. If you're trying to disappear, crossing into Mexico is a logical move. Distance to the border from Catalina foothills, approximately 70 miles. Travel time, roughly 90 minutes under normal conditions. But crossing the border requires passing through checkpoints. Border patrol, cameras, documentation checks, unless you're crossing unofficially. And if you know the terrain, if you've scouted crossing points, if you have contacts on the other side, the border becomes less of a barrier and more of a transition. West toward Marana. Marana is less populated than central Tucson, more space, more anonymity. If you're trying to lay low, Marana offers rural areas where a vehicle can be hidden, where a person can be concealed, where law enforcement presence is thinner. North toward Oro Valley. Another suburban corridor, but less logical as an escape route. Oro Valley leads back toward populated areas. More cameras, more witnesses, unlikely. The most probable routes, based on distance, timing, and logic, are south toward the border or west toward rural concealment. And Camino Royale, where the vehicle was captured, aligns with both possibilities. It's a transitional road, not a destination, a passage. Let's talk about the Kia Soul. It's one of the most common vehicles in the United States. Affordable, reliable, unremarkable, which makes it perfect for a crime like this. You don't want a vehicle that stands out. You don't want custom rims, distinctive colors, aftermarket modifications. You want something that blends in, something that could belong to anyone. A Kia Soul fits that profile. But here's the complication. Kia Souls are so common that identifying a specific vehicle from surveillance footage is difficult. You need more than just the make and model. You need license plate, distinguishing damage or markings, driver or passenger visible through windows. Without those details, the vehicle is a lead, not evidence. It places a possible suspect vehicle in the general area during the abduction window. But it doesn't confirm involvement. Not yet. 3 days after Nancy's disappearance, a ransom demand surfaces, amount $6 million. Payment method: Bitcoin. The demand is communicated indirectly. Details remain partially sealed in the investigation, but the Bitcoin wallet provided for payment is traceable. And here's what's strange. The wallet shows no activity, no deposits, no withdrawals, no transactions. It's inactive, which raises a critical question. If the motive is financial, why isn't the kidnapper monitoring the wallet? Why isn't there any attempt to collect? Two possibilities. The ransom is legitimate, but the kidnapper is waiting. Maybe they're aware that Bitcoin transactions are traceable, and maybe they're waiting for law enforcement attention to die down before attempting to collect. But 3 weeks have passed since the demand, and still, no activity. That's a long time to wait when you're sitting on a high-risk abduction. Or the ransom is staged. Maybe the demand was never meant to be collected. Maybe it was designed to misdirect, to make investigators believe the motive is financial, when it's not. If the ransom is staged, the real motive is something else. Control, elimination, concealment. And the $6 million demand is just noise. One detail from the ransom communication stands out. The demand references a main individual, not Nancy Guthrie, not the victim, not your mother. Main individual. That phrasing is strange. It suggests distance, formality, a deliberate avoidance of personal language. But it also suggests something else. Hierarchy. The phrase main individual implies there are other individuals, secondary, tertiary, which means whoever wrote the ransom demand is thinking in terms of structure. Not just Nancy, but Nancy and others, or Nancy as the primary target within a broader framework. That phrasing doesn't come from a lone actor. That comes from someone thinking operationally, someone who sees Nancy as a piece of a larger system. And that aligns with the two-person framework. Let's return to the glove, recovered 2 miles from Nancy's home. Male DNA. No match in FBI database. That DNA is evidence, but it's also a wall. Without a match, investigators can't identify the person who wore the glove. They can only profile them. Male, no criminal record, unknown. But DNA isn't useful unless you have something to compare it to. And here's the problem. If Tommaso Cioni is involved, his DNA is already at Nancy's house. Everywhere. He's been there for 20 years. His presence is expected, explainable. So even if investigators find his DNA at the scene, it doesn't prove involvement. It just proves proximity. And if Dominic Evans is involved, if he's the operative, his DNA might be on the glove. But without his DNA in the system, there's no match, no connection. The glove becomes a clue that leads nowhere, unless someone provides a reference sample, unless someone talks. $1 million reward offered by Nancy's family. Anonymous tips encouraged. Forensic analysis ongoing. The investigation is applying pressure, not through arrests, not through charges, through time. Every day that passes without resolution, the pressure increases. On the suspects, on their associates, on anyone who might know something. Because here's the reality. 2 people involved means 2 people who know. 2 people who carry the weight, 2 people who might crack. And the moment one of them speaks, whether for the reward, whether out of guilt, whether because the pressure becomes unbearable, the entire structure collapses. Let's think about this from the perspective of the 2 suspects. If Tommaso Cioni and Dominic Evans are involved, if they coordinated this, they're now locked in a mutual dependency. Neither can speak without incriminating the other, but neither can trust the other to stay silent. That's the calculus of conspiracy. As long as both stay quiet, both stay safe. But the moment one flips, the moment one decides to cooperate, to reduce their exposure, to take a deal, the other is finished. And that creates a race. Who speaks first gets the deal. Who waits gets the full charge. The $1 million reward accelerates that race, because now there's an incentive, not just survival, not just reduced sentencing, money, and money changes the equation. Law enforcement has received multiple anonymous tips since Nancy's disappearance, some credible, some not. But here's what's interesting. The volume of tips suggests that people in Tucson know something. Maybe not the full story, maybe not direct involvement, but something. A conversation overheard, a vehicle seen in an unusual location, a behavioral change in someone they know. Anonymous tips aren't about solving the case outright, and they're about narrowing the field, about pointing investigators toward the right neighborhood, the right individuals, the right timeline, and the more tips come in, the tighter the circle becomes. Let's return to the core question. How do you make a 72-year-old woman disappear from her own home without a trace? We've mapped the structure. Intelligence gathering, multiple surveillance visits, backward walks, camera tests, execution, disable cameras, enter house, locate Nancy, control her, remove her, escape, vehicle positioned nearby, exit through pre-planned route, disposal site selected. But here's the piece we haven't addressed. What happened to Nancy? Because the abduction is one thing, but the aftermath is another. If Nancy was taken for ransom, she'd need to be kept alive, hidden, monitored. But the ransom wallet is inactive. No collection attempted. Which suggests the ransom wasn't the motive. Which suggests Nancy wasn't kept alive. Which means somewhere in Tucson, or south of Tucson, or west of Tucson, there's a disposal site. A location remote enough that law enforcement hasn't found it yet. And that location is the final piece of evidence, the piece that turns theory into proof. Law enforcement has conducted searches in the Catalina foothills area, in surrounding neighborhoods, in desert corridors. But the search radius is vast. Tucson is surrounded by open terrain, desert, mountains, ravines, places where a person could be concealed for weeks, months, indefinitely. And if the disposal site was selected in advance, if it was scouted during the intelligence gathering phase, it's going to be remote, difficult to access, unlikely to be stumbled upon by hikers or passers-by. Which means law enforcement needs more than ground searches. They need direction, a tip, a confession, a piece of evidence that narrows the search radius. And that direction has to come from someone who knows, someone who was there, someone who helped. 3 weeks since Nancy disappeared, 3 weeks of investigation, surveillance footage reviewed, interviews conducted, forensic evidence processed, but no arrests, no charges, no resolution. And every day that passes, the trail gets colder. Witnesses forget details. Surveillance footage gets overwritten. Physical evidence degrades. But here's the thing. The psychological pressure doesn't degrade. It accumulates every day. And Tommaso, Cioni, and Dominic Evans, if they're involved, wake up knowing they're being watched. Knowing investigators are building a case. Knowing the net is tightening, and every day they have to maintain the facade. Go to work, interact with family, behave normally. That's exhausting, that's unsustainable. And eventually something breaks. A slip, a contradiction, a moment of panic, and when that moment comes, the case breaks with it. The March 2nd footage. Tommaso Cioni walking past the cameras at Nancy's home has been viewed thousands of times online. People are comparing his gait to the masked figure from February 1st, analyzing posture, shoulder movement, stride length, and whether or not those comparisons are forensically valid, they have achieved something else. They've placed Tommaso Cioni in the public's crosshairs. He's no longer just a grieving son-in-law. He's a suspect. And once that suspicion takes root, once the public starts looking at someone differently, it's almost impossible to reverse. Even if Tommaso is innocent, even if the gate comparisons are coincidental, the suspicion lingers. Here's what law enforcement knows. Nancy Guthrie was removed from her home during a precise 41-minute window. The operation required knowledge of the house, the cameras, the timeline. Multiple surveillance visits preceded the abduction. A vehicle matching the escape timeline was captured 2.5 miles from the scene. A glove with unknown male DNA was recovered 2 miles from the scene. A ransom demand was made, but never pursued. And two individuals, Tommaso Cioni and Dominic Evans, align with the two-role framework. But here's what law enforcement needs. One piece of direct evidence, a confession, a witness, a forensic match, something that connects the theory to proof, and that piece of evidence exists somewhere, in a text message, a phone record, a financial transaction, a surveillance camera investigators haven't reviewed yet, or in the mind of someone who knows, someone who was there, someone who's carrying the weight. If you're in Tucson and you know something, if you saw a vehicle on Camino Royale, if you heard a conversation, if you noticed a behavioral change in someone you know, you have a choice. Stay silent and the case stays cold. Speak and everything collapses. $1 million reward, anonymous tip line, law enforcement waiting. The structure is fragile. The moment one person speaks, the entire operation unravels. And the moment one person breaks, the other is exposed. And somewhere in Tucson, someone is deciding whether to stay silent or to speak. That decision will determine whether Nancy Guthrie is found, whether justice is served, whether the theory becomes proof. Nancy Guthrie disappeared on February 1st. It's been 3 weeks. The surveillance footage has been reviewed. The forensic evidence has been processed. The suspects have been identified, but no arrests have been made. Because the case isn't built on certainty. It's built on alignment. Alignment between behavior and capability. Alignment between opportunity and motive. Alignment between theory and evidence. And alignment isn't enough. Not yet. But it's close. So close that the suspects can feel it. So close that the structure is beginning to crack. And when it finally collapses, when one person speaks, when one piece of evidence surfaces, when one moment of panic leads to a mistake, the entire story will shift from theory to fact, from suspicion to proof, from mystery to resolution. But until that moment arrives, we're left with what we have. A 72-year-old woman who disappeared from her own home, 2 men who fit the operational framework, and a clock that's still ticking. Somewhere in Tucson, someone knows, and the moment they speak, everything changes.